December 1974. A phone rings inside CIA headquarters at Langley, Virginia. On the other end is a reporter named Seymour Hersh, calling from the newsroom of the New York Times. He has a question that makes the person on the other end go quiet. He wants to know about a massive, illegal domestic spying operation, one that has, according to his sources, compiled files on thousands of American citizens, students, journalists, clergy members, civil rights leaders, anti-war organisers, people who had done nothing more than speak their minds in a country that supposedly guaranteed them the right to do exactly that. Somewhere in a set of locked file cabinets, a name index waits. It holds roughly 300,000 entries, a staggering catalogue of American citizens and organisations, cross-referenced, annotated, and quietly assembled over the better part of a decade. Detailed dossiers exist on more than 7,000 individuals. None of them had been charged with a crime. Many had no idea they were being watched at all. And here is the detail that makes this story almost impossible to believe. The agency responsible for building this apparatus was never supposed to operate inside the United States in the first place. By law, by charter, by the very document that created it, the Central Intelligence Agency existed to gather intelligence abroad, not to police, surveil, or investigate American citizens on their own soil. That job belonged to others. So how did an agency built to watch the world end up quietly watching its own country? Who gave the order? How far did it go? And how, in an era with no internet, no leaks database, no whistleblower hotline, did anyone ever find out? That story begins not in 1974, but 7 years earlier, in the smoke-filled anxiety of a nation tearing itself apart over a war on the other side of the world. To understand why Project Chaos became such an explosive scandal, you first have to understand the wall it broke through. In 1947, in the earliest years of the Cold War, Congress passed the National Security Act, creating the Central Intelligence Agency out of the ashes of the wartime Office of Strategic Services. The law was deliberately narrow. The CIA was authorized to collect and coordinate foreign intelligence, information about other nations, their militaries, their intentions, their secrets. It was explicitly denied any police, subpoena, or law enforcement power on American soil. That authority belonged to the Federal Bureau of Investigation under J. Edgar Hoover, and to it alone. The distinction was not a technicality, it was a founding principle built on the fear that a powerful spy agency with no accountability could become a tool for domestic repression, watching and controlling the very citizens it was meant to protect. That firewall, once crossed, was the whole reason this story would matter so much. By the mid-1960s, that firewall was under enormous strain. The United States was pouring young men and resources into Vietnam, a war that grew bloodier and less popular by the month. On college campuses, in city streets, and outside the gates of the Pentagon itself, Americans gathered by the tens of thousands to demand it stop. The civil rights movement, already reshaping the nation, intersected with a growing counterculture and a new, more radical strain of protest. Cities burned in the summers of 1967 and 1968. Assassinations shook the public conscience. To many Americans watching the news each night, it felt as though the country itself might be coming apart at the seams. To President Lyndon Johnson, watching from the Oval Office, the scale and intensity of the unrest was difficult to accept as purely homegrown. Johnson had built his career on reading the currents of American political life, and something about the speed and coordination of the anti-war movement unsettled him. He suspected, as many officials in his administration did, that foreign powers, chiefly the Soviet Union, China, or Cuba, might be secretly funding, directing, or manipulating the protests. If true, it would mean the unrest tearing at American society wasn't simply dissent. It would mean it was a covert foreign operation, hiding in plain sight on American streets. The only problem was proving it. If you're finding this as unsettling as I did while researching it, take a second to hit subscribe. This channel exists to dig into exactly these kinds of buried chapters of American history, and there's a lot more still to come. And if a detail so far has caught you off guard, drop it in the comments. I read every one. In the spring and summer of 1967, Johnson pressed his intelligence chiefs for answers. He wanted to know definitively whether foreign governments were behind the anti-war movement. the task fell uncomfortably to the CIA. Richard Helms, the agency's director, understood better than almost anyone the legal tightrope this request represented. The CIA's own charter forbade this kind of domestic inquiry. But the pressure from the White House was not the kind of request an intelligence chief could simply decline. In August of 1967, Helms authorized a new, tightly compartmented program inside the agency's counterintelligence division. It would later become known, internally, by the cryptonym Chaos. Command of the operation's counterintelligence oversight fell to James Jesus Angleton, the CIA's legendary and famously secretive chief of counterintelligence, a man whose entire worldview was built around the belief that Soviet subversion could be hiding almost anywhere, disguised as something else entirely. Day-to-day management of the program was placed in the hands of a CIA officer named Richard Ober, who would spend years quietly building out its machinery, largely unknown even to much of the rest of the agency. In its earliest form, Chaos was narrowly framed and arguably defensible under the agency's foreign intelligence mandate. CIA stations overseas were instructed to report back on contacts between American anti-war activists travelling abroad and foreign communist officials, meetings in Havana, conferences in Eastern Europe, connections made at international peace gatherings. On paper, this was foreign intelligence collection, watching where Americans went and who they met once they left US borders. It was the kind of surveillance the CIA's charter arguably permitted. But intelligence rarely stays contained to its original mandate, and Chaos did not either. To understand who these travelling activists were meeting, analysts needed to understand who the activists were in the first place, their organisations, their networks, their correspondence, their movements at home. That need for context became the crack through which the operation flowed steadily inward, from the world stage onto American soil. Here's a quick reminder before we go further. If you want more deep dives like this one, subscribe and turn on notifications, because we publish new investigations regularly, and this is only the beginning of how deep this particular rabbit hole goes. Under Ober's direction, Chaos grew far beyond its original foreign contact mandate. The CIA began drawing on domestic sources of information that, strictly speaking, were not supposed to be its business at all. The FBI, which had for years run its own sprawling domestic surveillance and disruption program against civil rights leaders, anti-war organisers, and dissident groups under the name COINTELPRO, began sharing files and reports with the CIA's new operation. Information moved quietly between agencies that were legally supposed to occupy separate spheres, foreign versus domestic, blurring a line that Congress had drawn intentionally 2 decades earlier. Other covert programs fed directly into the Chaos apparatus. One, codenamed HTLINGUALL, involved the opening and photographing of international mail sent to and from individuals the CIA and FBI considered suspicious, a program that had in various forms quietly operated since the 1950s, entirely outside any judicial warrant. Another, run by the National Security Agency under the codename Minaret, intercepted international communications involving American citizens on government watch lists, again without court authorization. Together, these overlapping programs created something far larger and more invasive than anyone outside a small circle of officials understood, an interlocking web of surveillance, quietly built across multiple agencies, aimed increasingly inward at the American public itself. At the centre of it all sat a growing electronic index, built to organise the flood of information pouring in from informants, wiretaps, opened letters, and infiltrated meetings. Analysts called it Hydra. By the time the program reached its height, this computerized system held records on roughly 300,000 American citizens and organizations, names cross-referenced against travel records, correspondence, public statements, and reports from informants embedded inside activist groups. From that vast pool, CIA officers built detailed individual case files on more than 7,000 people. Who ended up in those files? The targets were not foreign agents or suspected spies in any conventional sense. They were anti-war organizers planning the next march on Washington. They were feminist activists building a new movement for equality. They were black nationalist leaders whose politics the government found threatening. They were journalists, clergy members, and student leaders whose only offence was organising, speaking, or writing things that made officials in Washington uneasy. Photographs were taken at demonstrations, informants sat in meetings, took notes, and reported back on conversations their fellow attendees believed were private. License plates outside protest headquarters were recorded and traced. Quick pause here. If this kind of investigative history is your thing, make sure you're subscribed, because we're just getting into the part of the story where the cracks start to show, and I don't want you to miss what comes next. Inside the CIA itself, the operation was not universally comfortable to those who knew of its existence. Even officers accustomed to secrecy understood, at some level, that what chaos represented was a direct violation of the boundary their agency had been built around. Compartmentalization kept most employees, and even most senior officials, from ever learning the program's true scope. Only a small circle at the top fully understood how far it had grown, and that secrecy was by design, not simply to protect against foreign discovery, but because those running it understood how it would look if it ever became public. And there was another, quieter problem hiding underneath the secrecy. For all its size and cost, chaos was not finding what it had originally set out to prove. Year after year, analysts sifted through mountains of surveillance data searching for evidence that foreign governments were secretly directing the American anti-war movement, financing its leaders, or orchestrating its protests from abroad. Year after year, that evidence failed to materialize in any persuasive form. The movement convulsing American campuses and city streets was, as far as the CIA's own analysts could determine, overwhelmingly homegrown, a genuine, if chaotic, expression of American political discontent, not a foreign conspiracy in disguise. That finding should have ended the program. Instead, it barely slowed it down. Admitting failure meant admitting that years of covert, questionably legal surveillance had produced little of real value, and no official wanted to be the one to say so to a White House that had ordered the search in the first place. So the searching continued, expanding its reach even as its central premise grew shakier with each passing year. If you've made it this far, consider dropping a like on this video. It genuinely helps this kind of research reach more people, and this story is about to shift into an even more unsettling chapter. When Richard Nixon entered the White House in January 1969, he inherited chaos along with the rest of the federal government's sprawling security apparatus. And if anything, his administration's appetite for domestic intelligence only grew. Nixon's presidency arrived amid continuing anti-war demonstrations, campus unrest that culminated in tragedies like the shootings at Kent State, and a White House increasingly gripped by a sense of siege. In 1970, a young White House aide named Tom Charles Houston drafted an ambitious blueprint, later known as the Houston Plan, proposing to dramatically intensify domestic intelligence operations, expanding wiretapping, authorizing surreptitious mail opening and even break-ins, and coordinating the CIA, FBI, NSA, and military intelligence into a unified surveillance effort against the American left. Nixon initially approved the plan. It was J. Edgar Hoover, protective of the FBI's own turf and wary of the legal exposure such a formal document created, who pushed back hard enough that the White House rescinded its official authorization within weeks. But the retreat was largely a matter of paperwork. Many of the activities the Houston Plan proposed were, in practice, already underway in one form or another, scattered across existing programs like Chaos, COINTELPRO, HTLE Lingual, and Minaret. The formal plan died. The informal reality it described mostly continued. Through the early 1970s, as the Watergate scandal began to take shape in the background, the broader atmosphere inside Nixon's Washington remained one of suspicion, secrecy, and expanding surveillance ambition. Chaos itself, still run out of its small compartmentalized corner of the CIA, kept absorbing new names, new files, and new reports, its original foreign intelligence justification growing thinner with every passing year. Real quick, if you're new here, subscribe so you don't miss where this story goes next, because the unraveling of Project Chaos is one of the more remarkable accountability stories in American history, and it starts with the very same scandal you might expect. The beginning of the end came, indirectly through Watergate, as investigators, journalists, and congressional committees pulled at the threads of Nixon's break-in scandal throughout 1973, the CYA's own entanglements with domestic political operations came under uncomfortable new scrutiny. That same year, James Schlesinger took over as Director of Central Intelligence, and in the wake of mounting Watergate-era revelations, he ordered an unprecedented internal review. Every CIA employee, past and present, was directed to report any activity the agency had ever undertaken that might have fallen outside its legal charter. The resulting internal document, compiled through 1973, ran to hundreds of pages and would later become infamous under an informal nickname, the Family Jewels. It catalogued decades of CIA activities that stretched far beyond the agency's legal mandate, including domestic mail opening, surveillance of journalists, and prominently, the operation known as Chaos. Schlesinger, alarmed by what the review revealed, ordered the program significantly curtailed before leaving the directorship later that same year. His successor, William Colby, inherited both the Family Jewels report and the difficult question of what to do with it. Colby continued winding the program down, and by 1974, Project Chaos had been formally terminated after roughly 7 years of operation. For a brief window, its existence remained a closely guarded secret, known only to a small circle of current and former officials, until one of them decided the public deserved to know. One more quick ask before we continue. If you're enjoying this kind of deep historical storytelling, subscribing really does help this channel keep making them. Now, on to the moment this entire story became public. In December 1974, Seymour Hersh published his findings in the New York Times under a headline that landed like a thunderclap across the country. A massive CIA operation, conducted for years against anti-war activists and other domestic dissidents, in direct violation of the agency's founding charter. The timing could hardly have been more explosive. Nixon had resigned from the presidency only months earlier, in August of that same year, and the American public's trust in its government institutions was already at a historic low. Coming so soon after Watergate, Hersh's revelations landed not as an isolated scandal, but as confirmation of something many Americans had already begun to fear, that the government's culture of secrecy and surveillance ran far deeper than one break-in at a hotel complex. The public reaction was immediate and furious. Newspapers across the country picked up the story. Members of Congress, already primed by Watergate to distrust unchecked executive power, demanded answers. How many Americans had been watched? Who had authorized it? And what, if anything, had all of this surveillance actually accomplished? President Gerald Ford, seeking to get ahead of the growing controversy, established a presidential commission in January 1975, led by Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, to investigate the CIA's domestic activities. But the Rockefeller Commission's inquiry, criticized by some as too narrow and too close to the executive branch it was meant to scrutinize, was quickly overshadowed by a far more ambitious undertaking on Capitol Hill. If you want to see how this story reaches its conclusion, stick with me. And if you haven't already, now's a great time to hit that subscribe button, because the investigation that followed changed the way American intelligence agencies operate to this day. In 1975, the United States Senate formed a special committee to investigate the full scope of the intelligence community's activities, chaired by Senator Frank Church of Idaho. Over the course of that year, the Church Committee conducted one of the most sweeping investigations into American intelligence agencies ever undertaken, examining not only Chaos, but a wider constellation of CIA and FBI programs that had operated for years in the shadows, hidden from public and congressional oversight alike. Investigators pored over classified files, interviewed current and former officials, and pieced together, in painstaking detail, exactly how far the government's domestic surveillance apparatus had reached. The Church Committee's findings on Project Chaos were damning. The investigation confirmed the staggering scale Hersh had first reported, the hundreds of thousands of names in the index, the thousands of individual case files, the years of surveillance directed at American citizens who had committed no crime beyond exercising their constitutional rights to speak, assemble, and dissent. The committee's report was blunt in its conclusion. The CIA had operated well outside the boundaries Congress had set for it in 1947 and had done so for years in near total secrecy, with almost no external oversight to check its growth. Just as damning was the finding on effectiveness. After nearly 7 years and an enormous expenditure of resources, the operation had failed to produce any credible evidence that foreign governments were directing the American anti-war movement. The very question that had justified its creation in the first place. The program's greatest legacy, in the eyes of the committee, was not intelligence gathered, but privacy violated. Ordinary Americans investigated, catalogued, and monitored for the simple act of disagreeing with their government's foreign policy. If this story has been worth your time so far, let me know in the comments what surprised you most. And subscribe if you want to catch the next documentary the moment it goes live. The fallout from the Church Committee's findings reshaped the American intelligence community in ways that endured for decades. In response to its recommendations, the Senate established a permanent Select Committee on Intelligence in 1976, followed by a House counterpart the following year, creating for the first time a standing congressional structure, specifically tasked with overseeing the CIA, NSA, and other intelligence agencies on an ongoing basis, rather than reacting only after a scandal broke into public view. President Ford, in early 1976, issued an executive order explicitly barring the CIA from domestic intelligence collection, targeting American citizens absent narrowly defined circumstances, formally reasserting the boundary the agency's original charter had drawn nearly 3 decades earlier. 2 years later, in 1978, Congress passed the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, establishing for the first time a formal legal and judicial framework governing how the government could conduct national security surveillance involving Americans, a direct response to the very abuses the Church Committee had uncovered. Project Chaos never resulted in the kind of dramatic courtroom trial many Americans might expect from a scandal of this magnitude. No senior official was criminally convicted for authorizing it. Its true punishment, in a sense, was exposure itself. The simple, devastating fact of the public finally learning what had been done in its name, in secret, for the better part of a decade. What Project Chaos ultimately revealed was not a single villain or a single decision, but a slow institutional drift, a gradual erosion of legal boundaries under the pressure of war, fear, and political anxiety, carried out one incremental expansion at a time until an agency built to watch the world had quietly turned its gaze inward on its own citizens. It stands today as one of the defining case studies in the history of American intelligence oversight, a reminder of how easily secrecy can outpace accountability when an institution operates for years without anyone watching the watchers. Nearly 300,000 names sat in that index by the time it was finally shut down. Most of the people on that list never learned they had been there at all. Somewhere in that anonymous, unglamorous fact, not a spy thriller, not a dramatic betrayal, just an ordinary citizen's name, quietly filed away by their own government, is the real story of Project Chaos, and perhaps the real warning it left behind. If you found this documentary as compelling as it was unsettling to research, subscribe for more meticulously researched, deep dives into the hidden history that shaped the world we live in now. There's a lot more still buried in the archives, and we're just getting started uncovering it.